What's up, everybody? It's your favorite second less popular list favorite nerd, and today we are talking about the top 5, bottom 5 non-Transformer figures of the year. For those that don't know, I review a ton of stuff here, all on Patreon, but a ton of different figures, ton of different lines, etc., etc. I buy a lot of figures from a lot of different lines, so I like to cover the kind of best, worst in the same way for those as well. So we'll start off with most disappointing, and like I said before, this doesn't mean that they were bad, it just means that it was not as good as I would have expected or hoped. So it could be a great figure, but if I'm used to a company that makes perfect figures, it could still be a disappointment. So we'll start with number 5, the entire Star Wars Black Series line. It just has gone from a line that was like really pushing the envelope of what you could do domestically with a 1/12 scale figure line, and it has just taken the path of least resistance, corner cutting, with I'm sure maximum profits in order to succeed. Gone are double jointed knees, in are ugly covered single hinge knees. Gone are soft goods, in are softer plastics that give you no range of motion. Just little decisions that they just continue to make that don't do anything for the line. And it used to be so good. And it used to be such a promising thing. But it has become an utter disappointment. Once again, not always bad, just disappointing. Number 4, Birds of Prey Harley Quinn. Mafex has been kicking butt and taking names pretty much all year. But you know what pretty much means? Not all year. And one of the examples of not all year would be the Birds of Prey Harley Quinn. It falls apart. The build is awful. It seems kind of phoned in. It was way after the movie, so it seems like, man, like we already have the mold, we gotta go through with it, but it almost seems like they didn't want to. And it comes across in the figure. And that's why it's number 4. Number 3, the Dreadnoks from G.I. Joe Classified. I think they get a number of things right on them as well, don't get me wrong, and it's not that they're awful figures, but not having either alternate heads with the goggles / sunglasses as a part of the mold, and offering them separately that you have to put on, and then they don't really sit quite right on the head nor face, always are constantly falling off and look distracting, is just not the way to have gone. And it looks like they're going to go that way on all of them. It's a huge mistake of a line that's actually fairly fantastic, and that's what makes it disappointing. Number 2, Hot Toys Cyborg. For one, it took forever for this figure to come out. It took even longer for the figure to be announced. And while it looks stunning, beautiful, and has tons of presence on a shelf, the articulation is just so awful. It barely gets by. It's so limited, and the range of motion is so minimal. It doesn't do anything for the display itself. And they had all the time in the world to get it right. Plus, they didn't have to deal with any soft goods. Huge disappointment. But not as much as my most disappointing figures of the year, which are the loose collectors. Now you can choose your poison here between Red Sonja or Vampirella. I'll go with Vampirella for ease, but this is a figure with a Mafex price point with a Hasbro Legend quality attached to it. I was looking forward to these, and I was hoping with the extra money that we were going to get some extra love, but you really don't. Probably just goes towards mold costs of a smaller company, and I get that, but it still makes it fairly disappointing in a modern day era. Add on top of that, it looks like they're going to be doing some image stuff next year. Really bums me out. Most disappointing figure of the year for me. So here they all are together. And like I said, it's not that they're all awful. In fact, of these, I own them all, and I'm happy with them enough on my shelf. It just meant that I had a certain bar in mind that they were meant to reach, and they didn't reach that. They fell short and left me disappointed. Let's move on to most surprisingly good figures. Now, in the inverse, it doesn't mean that these figures are great. It just means I expected them to be worse, and they ended up being better than I thought. Number 5, Super 7 Silverhawks. Now, they might pop up later on for a different reason, but the first 2 that were announced and the first 2 that came out were surprisingly good for Super 7. Not good figures, just surprisingly good for Super 7. Sculpts were a bit better, paint was a bit cleaner, extra paint like faded and highlighting and shading were all applied. Range of motion was a little bit better than normal, just was surprisingly good. Number 4, Robocin Buzz. This was a figure that taught me a lesson this year about what I want out of a figure. I didn't expect to think much of this. The non-transforming Robocin doesn't do a whole lot for me. Plus, I have no attachment to any of the Toy Story franchise. So I just figured that it was going to do anything for me. Turns out, it did a lot for me. I found it incredibly endearing and charming. There was a lot of people that were upset that it didn't have Tim Allen's voice, but that's kind of silly because it was never going to. It's from the movie. It's not meant to. It's a licensing thing. They didn't have the right to do it. You know, it's not like they made a decision. It's licensed from that movie. Either way, I found it surprisingly good. Number 3, the Notorious B.I.G. from Super 7. Once again, this has a lot to do with Super 7's reputation, but it also has something to do with Super Super 7's previous release, which was the Old Dirty figure, the ODB, from Wu-Tang Clan, which didn't really get the face sculpt right and kind of missed a few check marks along the way. B.I.G. did a lot better, kind of got it a lot more right, a lot more accurate, feels more like the icon himself, and I think is a lot more effective. Surprisingly good. Number 2, Jada Toys Fei Long. I thought at the price point, from a relatively new company in this space anyway, that this was going to be a disaster. Far from it. It's great. Right along the lines of a Marvel Legend or a Black Series figure, up to that standard. Fits in fine with your SH Figuarts. Good 1/12 scale at a very reasonable, affordable price point. Surprisingly good. And my number 1, the NECA Baby Sinclair figure from the Dinosaur Show. There's nothing really amazing or outstanding about it, but they did everything that they should have done. Giving you a ton of accessories, got the sculpt right, got the paint right, and there's something about it that the character bleeds through. In fact, when I was putting it together and kind of sitting with it, like I couldn't stop smiling. That's because it evokes the character and makes you think of it and the memories that you may have attached to it, which I do. And that's why it makes number 1 on my list. And here they all are together. A ragtag bunch for sure, but figures that I didn't expect a whole lot out of and ended up enjoying quite a bit. And I love that for me. Hope you do too. And now we'll move on to the worst non-Transformer figures. And coming in at number 5, also the Silverhawks from Super 7. But the second 2 they released, which didn't have the same love, care, and attention that the first 2 did. And instead gave you exactly what you expect from Super 7, which is a lot of trash that looks good on a shelf. And that's all I had to say. This company has gotten a lot of my money and they refuse to improve. In fact, they act like improving is beneath them. And I find that entirely frustrating. Number 4, all of the Dungeons and Dragons figures from Hasbro. Hasbro's been doing a lot of good stuff in the 1/12 space. Their G.I. Joe line is pretty great. Their Star Wars Black Series line is disappointing, but it still is what it is. And their Marvel Legends are fantastic. So here comes a 1/12 scale of a franchise that doesn't really get a whole lot of love, and it's pretty much a disaster. Toe up from the flow up, as they say. And I can't really find a good excuse as to why. And that's why they're making number 4 on my worst figures of the year list. Number 3, Kit's Concept Macross VF1S172. Has more components to its name than it actually has components of quality to it. Often falls apart, doesn't stay stuck in, feels cheap, flaps about, a real mess of a figure in a space that has a lot of options for something much better. One of the most frustrating experiences of my year in regard to reviews, and I would classify it as a complete disaster. In fact, I'm surprised I didn't take a wrench or a hammer to it. Number 2, Super 7's Big Bad Wolf. All of the problems that you would expect with a Super 7 figure. Limited articulation, limited paint, nothing special about the materials, hard to balance, etc., etc., etc. But along with that came a joint that was completely seized at the neck. And when I went to manipulate it, it snapped on me. That's a $60 piece of figure that is now completely worthless. And that's why it makes my number 2 of the year. The only reason why it makes number 2 for worst figure of the year is because I am responsible for the break. My number 1 worst figure of the year, I'm not responsible for part of the reason why it's so terrible, and that's the NECA robot from Turtles, Fugitoid. It's just awful. Decent sculpt, decent paint, that's where it stops. Articulation's terrible. Hindered isn't even a way to describe it. It's just almost non-existent. And it's not a cheap figure. Limited accessories and options, it just sort of is going to stand there and either look like a zombie or look like it's waiting for somebody to turn it on. Not a good figure by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it's my worst figure of the year in a non-transforming capacity. And there's my list of top 5 worst figures of the year. And I'm sad to report that of these, I bought 3 of them. The Silverhawks, the Big Bad Wolf, and the Fugitoid. Luckily, I was able to dodge a few bullets, but not as many as I would prefer. Now we'll move on to best non-Transformer figures of the year. And we'll start at number 5, and I think this came out this year. If not, I apologize, but I definitely reviewed it this year. It's the Felix Toys Dark Knight Joker. I'm not a big fan of soft goods on 1/12 scale figures. I have a general policy that they tend to look lifeless, but this figure kind of does it, and it does it well. Comes with a ton of accessories, one of which I unfortunately broke. Good sculpt, good paint, good materials. Like, it's just a pretty well done thing down. It's not amazing, and it's not like it's going to stop you dead in your tracks, but it's ambitious and it's not wrong. And that says something. It took some risks and it didn't fail. That says something. And that's why it's number 5. Number 4, Mafex Nightwing. As I said before, Mafex has really been kicking butt this year. This Nightwing is no exception. Embodies the character, comes with the appropriate accessories. The paint is clean. It's not tons of it, but it's clean, sharp, and appropriate. Materials feel good. It's a decent build. It just does the character a lot of justice, and this character doesn't get a whole lot of fanfare in the 112 space, so it was a real pleasure to mess with. Number 3, Sentinel Toys Miles Morales. Sentinel Toys knows how to make a figure. They're professionals, they're experts, they know what they're doing. This Miles Morales is no exception. It's amazing, comes with all the accessories that you would want, the build is great, it balances well, the sculpt is perfect, the paint is perfect, like it's just check, check, check. Comes with tons of different display options between different heads, clothing, accessories, etc. Really, really, really smart stuff. It's my number 3 figure of the year. My number 2 is Mafex Cyborg Superman. Once again, a character that doesn't get a whole lot of fanfare. It's not the most popular character in the world, but this toy does everything right. Sculpt, paint, build, articulation, etc. Like, it just does it all. The cape is great. The accessories are perfect and appropriate. It's just a knockout figure. Really, really solid effort from a company that's been improving leaps and bounds over the past couple years and keeping the streets fed. Very, very prolific. And you would think with all that prolificness you would lose quality, but it doesn't really seem to be the case. In fact, it seems to be the opposite. And then my number 1 figure of the year. And I have news for you. This figure is my figure of the year, period. I think it is the best figure released this year, period. Transformer, non-transformer, doesn't matter. It's my figure of the year. It's the mechanical Leonardo, Heat Toys, something like that. The robot Ninja Turtle Leonardo. The materials are outstanding. The build is outstanding. The sculpt is outstanding. The accessories are outstanding. The presence is outstanding. Playability is outstanding. The articulation is outstanding. Like, it just does almost everything perfectly. A really true masterpiece in the collector space. It feels premium. It feels like you get your money's worth. It's just an absolute knockout of a figure. It is without a doubt my figure of the year, and second place is far behind. And there they are, my top figure choices of the year. And they're quality. Good stuff. A lot of good stuff this year in the non-transformer space. I'm not sure what next year is going to look like, but time will tell. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here as we approach the new year. I have one more video in the series left to do, and I'm changing it up a bit this year. So you'll see that here shortly. I think tomorrow, as a matter of fact. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.